do a great deal of work in Edinburgh and in Scotland as a whole. And I don't see that we're on a level playing field, and I don't see that anybody has articulated a vision which makes somebody in Hawick feel as comfortable that they're part of that vision as somebody in Morningside. And how do we address that?
Okay, Jim, how did you do it in Dundee and the city region around it?
Well, I suppose there's one thing to recognise from the outset, that not all parts of Scotland would sit in a city region, and indeed that would be true for any area. It's recognising that certain, Strathclyde's an obvious one, Glasgow as the focus of a clear urban conurbation across the west of Scotland. People have a clear understanding of their own identity, but they realise that they're in the west of Scotland and they're from that area which looks to Glasgow for a number of things, be they cultural or technical in terms of provision. So it's not about trying to shoehorn everybody into a city region, it's about understanding that city regions are real historic geographic entities and rely on you used the hub and a wheel analogy, they rely on the connections that exist in their whole myriad of ways in order to operate. And it's about trying to harness that set of relationships and build on them in order to focus service delivery in a way which benefits everybody, rather than leave the individual components of those regions to compete in some kind of isolated way. And indeed, the Manchester example is an incredibly instructive one. I made the mistake of stepping over a canal thinking I was still in Manchester when I was in fact in Salford, and was subjected to a whole weekend of abuse for making that mistake. So right in the heart of urban Manchester there are divisions, and yet they can harness the energy of the whole city region to a really positive effect. So it's about understanding the context, it's about recognising we're not all in there, but when we are and we can see it, making the most of it.
Iain, I'm keen on investigating whether there's an overlap between some of these different proposals. How would your proposal fit with, or would it fit with Jim's city region model?
I think the context for me in West Dunbarton is a small council in the periphery of Glasgow. For decades, for all my lifetime, forever, Glasgow's been seen as a threat rather than an opportunity. And everybody thinks, well, Glasgow will do it and they'll just swallow us up. But actually, for us, as our economy changes to more leisure-based tourism, Glasgow's actually our biggest customer, but it's about getting that message across. But it's also about perhaps realising in the shared services, merged services agenda that it's not always the big partner that can do the delivery well, and there's a lot of small councils out there do things that are incredibly good, and it's about how you upskill that and say, well, upsize that, and how you say, well, we can actually deliver that for Glasgow, why not? There's no reason why you shouldn't if you're particularly good at one particular area of expertise, that you can't upskill that. You've got to take it away from this the biggest best, and my discussions with certainly the Glasgow leader at that time when I was in the shared services, he was very, very keen to say Glasgow don't actually want to deliver for the rest of you, so let's try and put that off the agenda.
I think those discussions might be held in abeyance until after May 2012.
Possibly,
Barry?
Barry McCulloch, CSPP. I would argue that equally important to vision is political leadership. Do you believe that that currently exists in Scotland, and do you also believe that the Six Cities Pledge that the city's made will be the vehicle to motivate that change?
I agree. The leadership is a key part of delivering on the vision. It does exist in Scotland. We've got to get better at it. There's a recognition right at the top of government that we have to be the people we want to become, be the place we want to become, and imbuing that sense of leadership and empowerment within the public sector is critical to making this work. I don't share Leslie Riddoch's view that the best thing is to abandon the public sector. My view is the best thing is to get it aligned with what people want it to deliver and to get it doing it really, really well. Do we need more? Do we need stronger leadership? Yes, absolutely. And do we need politicians who have the bravery to go with some pretty tricky long-term visions, stick with officers when maybe the short-term political thing looks like the best one to do? Yes, we definitely need that as well. But in order to make it happen, building on some of the examples that we are doing here. I mean, we wouldn't be able to refer to the work we've done with the T-Plan area, work we've done in Inverness and Stirling along the same lines, if it wasn't actually happening. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. We just need to make sure it's happening right across the country.
Okay, it's voting time again, so we'll have those cards at the ready. And 1, 2, 3, those in favour of the city-region concept as outlined by Jim. Oh, 1 or 2 more dissensions. Brave people, one of our interns.
Oh, no.
What's the issue? Come on.
Just I'm from pure countryside area. It just sounds that it's city regions only, more so than the countryside area. I mean, where I'm from, it's pure countryside. We don't even have a city close to us. It would be Glasgow. Indeed, my closest city to me is Belfast. So I was just wondering how that factors in.
So you just want to answer that one, Jim?
Yeah, well, as somebody that was born and brought up on the Isle of Skye, I recognise the issue that you raise. It has to be said, sadly, I looked to my city as being Inverness, which wasn't even a city at that time. The point I made right at the start, I think, is key to this. There are some parts of Scotland that are not in a city region. They may have cultural links, and indeed, actually in Skye, Glasgow is the city that the vast majority of people will think of and look to, and indeed have enormous numbers of relations living in for historical reasons. But it would never form part of an administrative or service provider idea of city regions. The key thing is understanding, as we sit here at the early 21st century, the power of city regions across Europe to drive economies and to get them being the engine room as the Six Cities idea is looking to build on, the engine room of the whole of Scotland. So basically successful city regions doing the right things can support indirectly the periphery, the rural hinterland, but they don't need to form part of the administrative centres that are delivering the services directly.
Okay, thanks. Can we thank Jim for his contribution? Okay, our final pitch is from Iain Lindley, who many of you will have seen earlier on. And this is just to prove the link between our work on cities and our work on towns. Iain wears a number of hats, in this particular case, Scotland's Towns Partnership, and he's pitching the interesting notion of townspeople power delivering good public services.
Yeah, thank you. There are 3 elements to this which hopefully plug together into the same jigsaw. I think the context is that to reduce national debt, local authorities and government agencies are offloading costs as quickly as they can. And meanwhile, we all rather hope that volunteers, social enterprises, others come to fill that void. Those communities that have achieved successful change have effective leaders and, some may say, facilitators who move between the sectors and are capable of joining up the local issues into realistic local actions. But we need to better support such leaders to come forward in a continuing collaborative process, and that needs cultural change amongst decision makers as to how to better work with grassroots. The first recommendation is that we need training to be effectively delivered, not exclusively, but certainly, to elected members and senior local authority officials. And that's around effective community engagement, improving communications and understanding to achieve joint action on local service delivery. And I reflect on the fact that the Welsh Assembly Government funds such facilitators up to 3 years before any funding bid is made to their regeneration programme. The big lottery advance funds facilitators in communities under 5,000 population. So the second recommendation is that we provide ongoing resources to such local facilitators across Scotland. Community engagement with Scottish community planning remains limited. We still rely on stop-start consultation and stop-start funding, but we need continuity of process in community planning to bring all stakeholders out of the woodwork from all sectors. Only then can you drive out the realistic priority actions which are costed and shared amongst those respective stakeholders. That tends to support the lessons that have emerged from the Total Place pilots, that it's about more effective use of existing resources, including private resources and earlier joint interventions. Scottish community planning also needs a framework within which community-based interests and enablers can be coordinated. The Market Towns initiative provides such a place-based health check to do that. It provides for systematic assessment of social, economic and physical strengths and weaknesses of a place. It provides the framework for cross-sectors to come together at the strategic, longer term and at the local short-term level. It enables consideration of those issues to be brought together from vision to practical action. I recommend we adopt such a framework. And finally, our community councils are poor relations when you compare them with many of the foreign counterparts. They need reinvigoration to attract skills, interest and energy. They need a real role. They need resources to fulfill that role, which demands a real commitment to shifting power. Power being information and resources from other agencies with an ongoing community planning framework. So I recommend that the role, funding and future of our lowest level of democratic accountability is reviewed.
Okay, so a different take there on place-based but also people-based policy and politics. Anybody on a community council want to pick up that point about community councils on that and ask a question about that? Presentation.
Hi there, my name is David. I work at Planning Aid for Scotland. A lot of what you said, it's more of a comment rather than a question, but we work with elected members for training for other officials in different councils. But one of the things that's consistent is the demand for more training for community councils to help, especially with capacity building for community councils. And some of the work that we've done, you see the variety of community councils and the consistency or inconsistency of perhaps quality across the country, in areas where they have local capacity and other areas where recently community councils have closed because they don't have enough people to keep them going, and so then there's no voice there. So it's trying to find ways to put resources towards that to help people then make those decisions.
You want to pick up on that?
Just, I think yes. All these things are self-reinforcing. You often hear people say, "Oh God, community councils, you can't give them any more power." That's not what we're talking about. We're actually talking about reviewing that whole local level. Community councils as they exist struggle to get interest, struggle to get people onto and stay with that kind of, that body. You can get some really excellent people come along and think, well, there's actually nothing happening here. There are no decisions being made, there are no resources to talk about. I'm off, I've got better things to do with my life. And you can keep going on that line. The other end of the equation is that some of my former elected members would say, we don't want to do that, do you? Because that means that, in effect, it's going to complicate decision making. We're the elected representatives. We know what's going on here. We know what the answers are that the community wants. And in a sense, I've always felt that the more feeds of information that you get, which are consistent in the sense that they're not just happening at a point in time when you go to people for a household survey or something else. If you get that information stream, that can only help elected members make informed decisions. And I don't see it as competition. I do